Branded a national disgrace, now set for a major shake-up. Birmingham's failing children's service. After a number of high-profile child deaths, control is to be handed to a trust.
They should be apologising for what the failings they've done, and I think it's just passing the buck.
Also tonight, still buried under here 3 months on, the victims of the Big power station collapse.
An oil strike in France hits supplies at hundreds of petrol stations. And
Monsieur Clouseau's residence.
Bert Kwok, star of the classic Pink Panther films, has died at the age of 85.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
good evening. Birmingham City Council's Children's Services Department was branded a national disgrace by inspectors back in 2013. Despite attempts to turn it around since then, standards have still not improved. Well, today came the announcement that it's to be run in future by a voluntary trust.
The council has one of the country's biggest children's services departments, but for many years it's also been one of the worst. In the last 10 years alone, there have been a string of high-profile child deaths, leading to 27 serious case reviews. But will this major shake-up make children in Birmingham any safer? Ben Chapman reports.
They are some of the faces of the children failed by their city. Kyra Ishak starved to death at home. Keanu Williams murdered by his mother after months of cruelty, and Keegan Downer beaten to death by her guardian last year. Now, after 27 serious case reviews in just 10 years, Birmingham's Children's Services Department is to be taken over by a trust. 18-month-old Keegan, who was also known as Cheyenne, died just 8 months after she was placed in her killer's custody on the recommendation of Children's Services. Darren Mahan used to babysit for Keegan and says concerns raised by her previous foster carer were ignored. He's sceptical about today's announcement.
I think it's too late, in my opinion. I think it should have happened a long time ago, because they've not just let Cheyenne down, they've let other children down as well. Them volunteering it, that they should be apologising for what the failings they've done, and I think it's just passing the buck.
Birmingham Children's Services was first placed into special measures back in 2009. Since then, it's been rated inadequate in each of its inspections, described as a national disgrace by the head of Ofsted, Sir Michael Wilshaw, 3 years ago. An external commissioner was appointed in 2014 to oversee and restructure it over 3 years.
You're 2 years into a 3-year review. Isn't this an admission of failure?
No. We've brought our caseloads down to 15. They were 30 when I started. We've brought our agency social worker rates down, and we've brought our staff turnover rates down massively.
But this is something councils tend to do when they're failing. So if everything's going well, why are you doing it?
In the past, yes, but in the future, no. So there are lots of good councils up and down the country who have been looking at alternative models for children's services.
I am not coping with my cases. I'm not coping.
The council denies it's linked to an undercover documentary which claims a chaotic department with huge caseloads and poor decisions. The Department for Education says Birmingham hasn't improved far or fast enough.
I think it's only basically because there's a huge amount of pressure from the government and from people like myself who are concerned about the number of deaths that have taken place, which is far too many.
Questions remain about how the new setup will be staffed, managed and resourced, but it is finally an acceptance that after so many failures, something needs to change. The council insists this is a choice, a new and better way of doing things, but 8 years after it first came to national attention and we were told things were getting better, came all the questions surrounding the death of Keegan Downer last year. The council is still struggling to recruit social workers. It's still overly reliant on agency staff. Social workers have huge caseloads, and in a huge city with huge levels of deprivation, transferring responsibility to a trust will not immediately solve all of those problems.
Ben Chapman in Birmingham, thank you.
The family of a worker killed in the Didcot power station collapse have told ITV News they feel hopeless and helpless after work to recover the bodies was halted.
The bodies of Christopher Huxtable and 2 of his colleagues still have not been recovered from the site 3 months after the accident. Christopher's mother and sister have been speaking to our reporter, Rupert Evelyn.
No work, no rush. There's not even a plan to find 3 bodies. 13 weeks after the power station collapsed, and no one can give the families a clear answer. Now the search has been called off, and Chris Huxtable's family are no closer to getting him back than they were the day he was buried beneath the wreckage.
Back at square one. That's how I feel.
Why is that?
Because nothing's been done. Well, they just need to get people in to sort this out as soon as possible, because we can't keep just leaving 3 poor men laying there. Hard-working men laying there, dead. Where's the dignity there?
Angered by inaction, their only comfort is in their memories.
Quiet.
Right.
Very quiet boy. It's like his father that way. Hard-working boy. Worked all his life. And this is a job he wanted to do because he followed his father.
There's one there. There's one there.
Yeah. Even though they know where the bodies of Chris Huxtable, Ken Creswell and John Shaw are, health and safety prevents recovery. A 50-metre exclusion zone is in place and will remain until the rest of the structure is brought down. RWE, who own the site, say they're doing all they can, but the health and safety executive confirmed to ITV News that they are still waiting for a demolition plan.
It's not fair. Why should we live like this? They were hard-working men, them 3 men, and they've been left to rot.
No one wants further injuries, but a sense of urgency and a plan to recover the dead would help those who say their lives are stuck in limbo. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Swansea.
Former Prime Minister Tony Blair has admitted he underestimated the problems unleashed by the toppling of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. He also conceded that the vacuum created played a part in allowing a so-called Islamic State to grow. He says he now understands how removing a dictator could destabilise a region. His comments come just weeks before the Chilcot report into the Iraq War is due to be published. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
Tony Blair knows something the rest of us do not. He knows what the Iraq Inquiry report says about him. So anything he says about the Iraq War must be seen in that light, and today he made this admission about his government's knowledge of Iraq.
We underestimated profoundly the forces that were at work in the region and that would take advantage of the change once you topple the regime, and that's the lesson. I mean, the lesson is not actually complicated. The lesson is simple. It's that when you remove the dictatorship, out come these forces of destabilization.
He went on to say that his understanding of the region is deeper today than it was when he was Prime Minister, but his critics are unimpressed.
This is a pathetic parody of an excuse for a Prime Minister. He's actually trying to get his excuses in first. However, it's not going to work. I think, hopefully and finally, this man will be held to account for the extraordinary damage he caused to this country and the consequences in the Middle East and the horror of it that we're still living with today.
Iraq is again, or perhaps still, in a state of war. Iraqi forces are currently fighting to capture Fallujah from so-called Islamic State, just as US Marines once fought to capture it from insurgents. The Arab Spring played its part here, but many also believe this is a legacy of the Iraq War. The inquiry into that war, which began here in 2009, is finally due to report in 6 weeks' time. And some see Mr. Blair's comments today as an early response to the criticism Sir John Chilcot is expected to make of him. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Greece has started clearing thousands of refugees and migrants from the country's largest makeshift camp.
More than 400 riot police have entered the Idomeni camp on the Macedonian border. Greek authorities say more than 8,000 people will be gradually moved to new camps.
A strike over new labour laws has now spread to all French oil refineries, leaving 1 in 5 petrol stations with little or no fuel. Huge queues have built up around those that remain open, with many motorists panic buying.
It comes, of course, as many British families prepare to travel to the continent for the half-term break. Emma Murphy reports on the escalating dispute.
Their argument is against an extension of the 35-hour working week and other labour reforms. Their targets, the refineries which fill French tanks. For days now, striking workers have laid siege to some of the country's depots, blockading the way in and out for fuel. As a result, around a fifth of France's 12,000 petrol stations are now running dry. With the country preparing for an influx of British half-term travellers next week, the government has deployed riot police to break down the barricades, to the fury of those manning them. The French government insists that their emergency fuel reserves will last for at least 90 days, but that isn't stopping the queues for pumps. This motorist says she queued for 2 hours. I waited for so long, she said. Everybody is irritated and stressed. Bosses are calling us asking, where are you? It's annoying to take so much time to do pretty much nothing. President Hollande continues to insist his reforms are valid, but that is of little comfort to those struggling to get to work. And until these blockades are broken, fuel will remain in short supply and in high demand. The warning to those planning to visit: fill up before crossing the border. Emma Murphy, ITV News.
Well, France faces an even greater security headache in a little over a fortnight with the start of Euro 2016. Today, British police said they're expecting around 500,000 England, Wales and Northern Ireland fans to travel to France. Many won't have tickets, and there will be a 24-hour drinking ban around England's match against Wales. Well, our security editor, Rohit Katru, is here. Sounds like a pretty major operation, this.
It is a major operation, and major for two reasons. Firstly, because, as you say, 500,000 British people will be travelling to France for these games. It's thought roughly 1% of the entire population, because there is not one but 3 home teams taking part, but also because this is all happening unusually in a country that is in a state of emergency. It will take place 7 months after the Paris attacks last November, and last weekend actually we saw security very tight and under a great deal of scrutiny at the Stade de France for the National Cup final there. But later on, after these pictures were filmed, there were actually flares that were lit inside the stadium, which were apparently smuggled in through a police cordon. Nevertheless, the British police told me today, and some of those officers will be in France, that they have every confidence in the way the French authorities will deal with this.
The French are confident that they can deliver the operation. They will get support from all the European countries, all the participants, not just in terms of football policing, but obviously in terms of counter-terrorism security. They will work, as they always do, with ourselves and everyone else. And there is confidence on the part of the French that they can deliver a safe operation.
And potential flashpoints, Mary, include the England-Wales game in Lyon. There are 2,000 fans with banning orders. If they break them, they're at risk of a 7-month custodial sentence. Should be noted, though, that football disorder among British fans has actually fallen during recent tournaments. The difference this time is the proximity to the UK, but also the backdrop of a heightened terrorist risk.
OK, Rohit, thank you.
Right, still to come on the ITV Evening News. Pressure grows on Russia. Now 14 of their athletes are implicated in positive tests from the Beijing Olympics. And
Bert Kwok, who played Kato in the Pink Panther films, has died at the age of 85.
But first, with just over 4 weeks until the EU referendum, ITV News is travelling right across the United Kingdom to see which issues will be uppermost in voters' minds. In England, one of the key concerns is immigration, especially from within Europe. But not every region has the same experience. More than 250,000 EU migrants live in the east of England, whereas only 40,000 live in the northeast. For the first part of his journey on the road to referendum, our correspondent Martin Geisler has travelled first to Spalding and Wisbech and then on to Sunderland to gauge the views of voters there.
It's a busy time in the fields of Lincolnshire. This team is working 10-hour shifts planting celeriac on Robin Buck's farm. There are 12 of them, all from either Latvia or Lithuania. They're paid £10 an hour to do a job British labourers don't seem to want anymore.
It's very difficult to know what young people
in schools want to do now, but agriculture and this sort of work is much better paid than they imagine it would be, and I wish that we could have more applicants from the UK.
But the fact is, they just don't come.
No, they're not coming.
It's casual labour. If it rains, they can't work and they don't get paid. Still, Igor Zavatskis told me he earns 4 times as much here as he would back home. He only planned to come to Britain for a few months. That was 6 years ago. Are you going to stay here?
I hope so. If it's gonna be everything okay, if UK not gonna come out from UA, it's gonna be fine.
And you're going to stay? You're going to settle down here?
Yeah.
That's a common story. Around a third of the population of nearby Wisbech is now thought to be from Eastern Europe. It's putting pressure on services.
Dominica.
The Orchard Primary School is creating a new class every year. There are 16 nationalities here, and many of the staff are bilingual. But that's a good thing, the head told me, for the children and for their town.
Wisbech is a phenomenally vibrant market town. You hear all the time, don't you, of market towns in decline, empty shops and so on. You won't find that in Wisbech.
But not everyone is so accommodating. One study placed Wisbech among the least integrated towns in Britain. Ken and Monica York moved here to retire 20 years ago. They say the community has changed completely in that time. They want Britain to tighten its borders and leave the EU.
I think we should leave. I don't think there's enough restriction on. I'm not saying don't have migrants in the country or people coming in, but I think there should be some restriction on the amount of people. We are basically being flooded.
This is a migration hotspot. What's happening here is not the norm. But stories from places like Wisbech feed into a broader perception of what's happening across Britain. So even in places where immigration is not a major local issue, it's still seen as one of the key arguments in this whole debate. We drove north to Sunderland. EU migration here is well below the national average, but attitudes are hardening nonetheless. Support for UKIP is growing in this old Labour heartland. In the South Hilton Working Men's Club, their policies are going down well.
I think there's too many people coming in and we're losing our identity.
Do you see many European immigrants in this part of the country?
No, I've got to admit that it's further down. It's not up at this end. I didn't say much in the northeast.
But you still worry about it?
Aye, without a doubt.
This region's traditional industries are in sharp decline. The Pallion shipyard on the River Wear is struggling to stay open with no orders coming in. Its boss understands the anger and the apathy that people here feel, but he hopes they'll come out to vote. Brussels hasn't brought many benefits to the northeast, he says, but better the devil you know.
If I'm pushed, I personally think the region will vote to stay in. But I think it's going to be close.
For better or for worse, Britain is changing. The coming weeks will determine the direction we take from here. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Sunderland.
The Home Secretary has attacked the fire service for being too white and too male and warns it's facing more cuts in the years ahead. Theresa May says there must be radical and ambitious reforms from top to bottom, but she's stressing that that should not mean a reduction in quality. Richard Pallow spoke to firefighters and their union about the plans.
Heading out on a call this afternoon, a crew from Shropshire Fire and Rescue. If the service they provide remains a reassuring constant, these firefighters also now know that some things are going to have to change. In a first speech since the fire service came under her control, the Home Secretary's message was not exactly subtle. Just like the police previously, reform is coming.
I see a service that has succeeded in spite of the framework it operates in, not because of it. A fire and rescue landscape still beset by poor governance and structures. A workforce lacking diversity and still bound by many of the old ways of working.
Among her many criticisms, the fact that 96% of staff in England and Wales are white, while 95% are male, a workforce not reflecting those that they are serving. Also highlighted was that overall there's been no change in the numbers of personnel employed, despite a 42% fall in the number of incidents over the last decade. Here in Shropshire, they've already cut firefighters by a fifth and fear what might be forced upon them.
The brunt of the savings so far have been around our whole-time firefighters. If we're going to make any further savings, we've got to be looking away from the front line because there is a potential that our operational capability will be compromised.
Fire service.
Independent inspectors are to be appointed, but unions say the fire service is not being given enough credit for its scope of work.
There's a whole vast range of other work that firefighters today are doing. Road traffic collisions, emergency medical work to some degree, the floods, preparing for terrorist attack.
An extended remit, the potentially shrinking workforce. Further integration with the other emergency services seems inevitable. Richard Pallo, ITV News, Shrewsbury.
A US judge has ruled that Bill Cosby should stand trial over a sexual assault charge. The 78-year-old actor and comedian is accused of drugging and molesting a woman at his home in Philadelphia in 2004. Dozens of other women have made similar accusations. Mr. Cosby says they were all consensual.
Russian athletes' hopes of appearing at the Rio Olympics received another blow today. Another 14 have tested positive for doping, this time at the Beijing Games back in 2008. It follows the retesting of samples taken at the time and is thought to include several medal winners. Our sports correspondent Ian Payne is here. So, Ian, the problems mount for the Russian authorities. What are they saying tonight?
Well, this news has come from Russian state television, Mark, and it makes Russian athletes' ban, as you say, at Rio looking even more likely now. You'll remember that last week the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, announced that they'd retested over 450 samples from the 2008 Games in this laboratory at their headquarters in Switzerland. They were able to retest them because the samples are kept for 10 years now and they have new state-of-the-art science to do it. Of those samples, 31 were positive, but no details were given. But now Russian TV says that of those 31 positive tests, 14 of them are Russians, 11 athletes, 2 weightlifters and a rower. And among the athletes who's been accused is the high jumper, Anna Chicharova. She won the bronze in 2008, but she also won the gold medal in London. She's said to be shocked. We also know that the IOC have tested a further 250 samples from London 2012, so goodness knows what that's going to bring too. But the real story here is this is going to put even more pressure on athletics' governing body to ban the Russians from Rio.
Indeed, big decision ahead for Lord Coe. Ian, thank you very much indeed.
Britain's Andy Murray has survived a major scare in the first round of the French Open. The world number 2 was taken to 5 sets by the veteran Czech Radek Stepanek.
Oh, he's done it!
Oh, Murray will now face the French wildcard Mattia Borg, who's ranked 164 in the world.
And finally tonight, tributes to Bert Kwok, the actor best known for playing Kato in the Pink Panther films, who died earlier today. The 85-year-old also starred in James Bond movies, war drama Tenko and the TV show Last of the Summer Wine.
But for many, of course, he will always be remembered for his hilarious on-screen fights with Peter Sellers, as Duncan Golestani reports.
Kato usually does some cooking for me, but recently he's taken to attacking me at every chance.
No Pink Panther film was complete without a fight scene between Clouseau and his manservant Kato. The attacks were always unexpected, imaginative, and just a little hapless. The havoc usually interrupted by a ringing phone.
It's the scene.
Monsieur Clouseau's residence. Very well.
Born in Manchester and raised in Shanghai, Kwok's acting career took off in the 1960s.
Operation Grand Slam, for instance.
He would go on to star in 3 James Bonds, working regularly in film and television. In the prisoner of war drama Tenko, Kwok played the camp commandant.
I am Major Yamauchi.
Later in his career, he joked if a character was from the Far East, producers would come calling.
Oh, me no kill them, just catch them and saw off horns.
Doesn't that hurt them?
No, just make eyes water.
By his 6th decade in the business, Bert Kwok settled into Last of the Summer Wine. That gift for physical comedy undiminished by age.
I'll tell you, all the shows I do, I find great fun, because there's always something you can find to giggle at, to laugh at. And it's been a lovely roller coaster ride.
Wonderful Bert Kwok, whose death was announced today. That's it. Tom's back at 10.
But from all of us, have a very good evening.
Bye-bye.